Let's start our color theory watercolor project. You should have watercolors, brushes, a water cup, paper towel. I am going to start off by drawing my subject matter. So if you looked on the Pinterest page, you could see some spring themed ideas for your watercolor paintings. You can choose whatever you want to do for your project. It does not have to match that. I'm starting with a pencil, sketching lightly because I am going to erase all of those hard lines. If you paint over top of them, they sort of get sealed underneath the watercolor and you can see them really well. So I always go back over it with an eraser just so that I can still see the lines, but they're not gonna show up super bright under the watercolor paints. Make sure you get all that eraser off there too, or it could get stuck under the watercolor as well. At this point, you could choose if you want hard lines, you could use either a black crayon, a black colored pencil, or a black Sharpie to outline your subject matter. Try not to use something that is water soluble because it will basically just turn into a big black inky mess. All right, now that we have our materials, we can start to paint. You need to choose what are you gonna paint first, your subject matter or your background. Because if you paint them all at the same time, I'm going to show you what happens. Water is attracted to itself and it will run together into a watercolor mud puddle is what I call it. So I painted this with one color and I'm painting my green right next to it. Since the purple is still wet, you can see that it's bleeding into the green. This is the greatest challenge with watercolor and usually the biggest mistake that we make when using watercolors. So what you have to do is to allow dry time between each thing that you paint. If it's dry, it won't run together. And you can also overlap colors that way. So you can see now I'm putting orange next to that green and it will run together as well. If you are trying to blend colors, obviously you can paint them next to each other. They will blend and run together. You can push them together with your brush. But if you don't want them to look like this muddy mud puddle mess, then you have to wait for your subject matter to dry before you paint your background, or for your background to dry before you paint your subject matter. I'm going to be painting my background today. So I've erased my duck outline and I am just going to start with some blue paint going around the outside of my duck. If you want to use a smaller brush for this so that you don't paint into the duck, that is fine. If your subject matter is going to be darker than your background, it's a little less stressful because you can, again, after it's dry, paint over that lighter color anyways. So you'll hide any flaws from painting inside the subject matter. I'm trying to be careful because my duck is going to be lighter than blue background. So I'm using a lot of water and I kind of want to make it look like different shades of blue in the sky. And I'm trying to be like fluffy with my brush, make it look like clouds, not so perfect and flat. You can drop water droplets into the watercolor. That sort of makes cloud effect. Try that. But just going around the outside of the duck and making sure that I get all those little spaces. I had to turn it sideways so that you could see down to the bottom. And after I have my sky, I'm going to pick up some, I'm going to wait a little bit so that my green doesn't run into my sky. So then I'm going to pick up some green to do the ground, the grass color. I do want to blend that green into the blue because we know that yellow, it's like a yellow-green. Those are friends. Those colors are friends. Analogous colors so that I can blend them and they'll just make a nice darker shade of green. So if you're using analogous colors, they blend really nicely. Obviously, if I was painting like a brown ground or a orange ground, I wouldn't let it blend in with the blue because that would turn yucky. And we should know that from our color theory. And I'm just sort of adding some texture, making it look like grass. Trying to be round and flat. All right, and that's all I'm going to do for today because I need that to dry so that I can do my duck.